The harsh bright lights in General Alden Briggs's office cast sharp shadows over his shiny desk and the award pictures on the wall behind him. Specialist Rowan Hail stood perfectly still before him. Head held high, shoulders straight, her silent presence seemed lost in the room's tense quiet. Just 27, her small size and calm way of standing made her look more like someone who simply moved papers than a tough soldier who had faced difficult times. Briggs didn't hide his annoyance. He walked around her saying her hair bun wasn't quite right for the rules, even tapping her head as if she were a new recruit needing to learn obedience. Two assistants stood stiffly by the wall looking straight ahead, but their rigid quietness showed how tense the air was. Without a word, Briggs suddenly grabbed a pair of scissors from his desk. The loud sound of metal scraping echoed as he opened the sharp blades. He then grabbed her hair and cut right through it, leaving uneven bits to fall onto her uniform and the floor. He claimed it was just a way to teach her modesty, nothing beyond that. Outside his office, soldiers passing by paused as dark strands of her hair floated into the hall. No one spoke a single word. No one had any idea who she truly was or what lay hidden beneath the surface. Mornings at Fort Brenton rarely began with loud bells or bugle calls. Instead, they started with the steady sound of boots on shiny floors and the soft hum of printers coming to life in the communications building. Specialist Rowan Hail moved through this daily rhythm like a quiet stream, a folder in one hand, a tablet in the other. She was the kind of soldier people saw every day but never really looked at. Her name appeared on rosters and work schedules, but to most in the unit, she was just the small office clerk who always seemed to carry papers from one place to another. In the busy unit headquarters, she glided between desks, dropping off message reports, signature forms and equipment logs. Officers barely glanced up when she entered. A captain signed where she pointed without reading, thanked her automatically, and returned his attention to his screen. She gave short, clear answers, never saying more than needed, never seeking attention. Her uniform was always clean, pressed, and strangely plain. She had no bright patches, no signs of combat, no personal touches. Down in the signal area where cable spools and radio boxes filled the floor, Rowan moved with the same careful pace. She wrote down serial numbers, updated status sheets, and checked off items with neat, steady handwriting that never trembled. When someone called her name from across the room, she turned with that small, calm nod that suggested she heard everything, even when she said almost nothing herself. To most of them, she was simply the woman who filed communication reports and made sure the paperwork was always up to date. Specialist Moreno once joked loudly that if the army ever ran out of staplers, Rowan would be without a job. A couple of soldiers chuckled, a quick laugh that bounced off walls and quickly faded. Rowan didn't react. She slid the signed forms into a folder, carefully straightened the edges with her thumb, and moved on. No eye roll, no sigh, no outward sign of being bothered. What almost no one noticed was the specific way she moved. Her shoulders stayed perfectly level. Her eyes tracked more than just the path in front of her. She had a way of standing in a doorway that allowed her to see exits and corners without appearing to be trying. When she crossed the motor pool, she stepped around things by instinct, her body shifting in small, smooth ways as if she had walked through tighter, more dangerous places than a concrete lot with parked trucks. Her past was an empty space in most conversation. People knew she was new to the base, recently transferred. Her files said she had come from another post. Nothing seemed unusual. When someone asked where she had been before, she always gave the same soft answer: another unit in the country, signal work. Nothing special. Then she would offer a small smile that didn't invite more questions, quickly shifting the talk back to the task at hand. After a few weeks, most people stopped asking. Rowan's sleeves showed nothing but standard rank and unit pat. No combat stripes, no dates of deployments, no quiet hints that she had served anywhere beyond a normal assignment. This bothered some people in a way they couldn't explain. A specialist who moved so smoothly, who never complained or boasted, yet carried herself with the balance found in experienced leaders. The human mind quickly fills gaps. Where there are no answers, rumors begin to grow. In the smoking area, someone claimed they heard she had failed out of a tough training course. Another said she had quit an aviation program and was then put into office work. A private swore she'd heard Rowan was too soft for frontline units, so they assigned her to the signal shop to keep her out of the way. None of these stories were written down. None were checked, but they sounded believable enough that people nodded and spread them around. "She's just here because she couldn't handle it somewhere else," one corporal said, watching her walk across the base with a stack of papers. "Yeah," another replied, "soft. Office soft. Good at paper cuts and spreadsheet." Inside the section office, Staff Sergeant Lucas Redden overheard bits of these comments as they floated through open doors. He wasn't the type to chase every rumor. Redden had the steady wisdom of a man who had served long enough to know what truly mattered and what didn't. He watched Rowan instead of talking about her. He noticed how she managed tasks, how she never missed deadlines, how she seemed to know what the team leader would ask for before the question was even spoken. When he placed a half-finished communications packet on her desk with a tired apology and a tight deadline, she didn't complain. She simply nodded, sat down and began sorting through the mess with careful focus. Within half an hour the stack was organized, labeled and ready for signature. She didn't draw attention to her own effort. She simply put it on his desk, gave a brief report, and asked if anything else needed doing. Redden didn't know who she had been before Fort Brenton, but he recognized skill when he saw it. He also noticed other things: the way she instinctively checked her watch against the wall clock, how her eyes paused on emergency exit maps, how she adjusted her stance when a loud noise suddenly went off, shifting her weight for balance instead of flinching. He put it down to good instinct. Maybe she had a difficult childhood. Maybe she just paid more attention than most. He didn't push. One afternoon, an older sergeant first class from another company leaned in the doorway while Rowan crossed the hallway with a binder against her hip. The sergeant watched her walk away, something tightening in his expression for just a second. Her smooth, quiet steps, the way her head stayed level, the subtle readiness in her posture. It looked exactly like the confident stride he had seen in combat-trained special operators overseas, the ones who moved as if the ground could shift at any moment and they would still stay upright. He almost called out to her, almost asked where she had learned to move like that. Then the moment passed. He shook his head, reminded himself she was just a specialist in the signal shop, and turned back to his own pile of problems. People saw what the paperwork told them to see, and the paperwork said she was an office clerk in a quiet unit that kept the radios working and the reports flowing. So Rowan kept walking the halls of Fort Brenton, carrying folders and messages, listening more than she spoke. Soldiers dismissed her with lazy jokes about staplers and spreadsheets. Rumors painted her as someone who had failed somewhere else. She took it all in without reaction, letting the words pass by like dust. Her shoulders stayed level, her gaze stayed steady, and day after day the base continued, unaware that the quiet specialist they barely noticed carried a truth none of them were ready for. The hallway outside General Briggs's office felt tighter than usual the next morning, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Soldiers moved in small groups, glancing toward the closed door Rowan had walked through the day before. No one spoke her name aloud, but whispers spread faster than any memo on the base. Someone heard she had been disrespectful. Another claimed she talked back in a meeting. By lunchtime the story had changed into a dozen versions, none of them true, all of them loud enough to follow her through the unit area. Rowan stepped through the main hallway with a stack of files against her chest. Her freshly cut hair, uneven and jagged, framed her face in a way that made the whispers sharpen as she walked by. Two privates stopped mid-conversation, their eyes widening at the sight of her scalp, raw at the edge of her hairline. "Looks like somebody got punished," one muttered. "By the general," the other added, a smirk appearing. She probably thought she was important. Rowan heard it. She heard every word. She didn't slow down. She didn't glance their way. She kept her breathing steady even as the hallway seemed to buzz with judgment around her. Near the signal bay entrance, Specialist Granger leaned against a wall with Corporal Tate, both wearing the confident, lazy slouch of soldiers who believed they understood how the world worked. They watched Rowan walk past like she was part of a show. "Told you," Granger said quietly. She tried too hard to act perfect. "Look at her now." Tate chuckled. "Bet she tried to correct the general. That would do it." Rowan set the files on a desk, adjusted the edge, and continued with her tasks. The silence she carried was no longer light. It hung around her like a weight on her shoulders, invisible, but very real. She moved through it the same way she moved through everything. Quiet, controlled, careful, but the room felt the difference. Later that morning, the unit gathered for a joint communication drill brief. Folding chairs filled the training room, soldiers shifting in their seats as the operations captain clicked through slides full of frequency charts and emergency routing plans. Rowan sat near the back, taking quick notes with her usual precision. When the captain asked for someone to hand out updated channel cards, Rowan stood. It was instinctive, efficient, but as she stepped forward, the captain sharply raised a hand. "Specialist," he said loud enough for the front rows to turn. "Let the real soldiers handle it." A few snickers echoed around the room, some trying to hide their reactions, others not caring. Rowan stopped, returned to her seat, and folded her hands over her notebook. She didn't look down, she stared straight ahead, her expression calm, her heartbeat steady. But the silence that now wrapped around her felt different. It was colder, heavier, the kind that made even a few older non-commissioned officers shift uncomfortably. Outside after the briefing, a passing infantry squad saw her carrying equipment sheets across the grass. One of them nudged the other, pointing toward her uneven hair. "Punishment haircut," he said. She must have talked back. "Yeah." Another soldier laughed. "Looks like a basic trainee who forgot her place." Rowan kept walking. She didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction, but the weight of their laughter clung to the air even after she passed out of earshot. Even Staff Sergeant Redden, usually calm, felt something twist in his chest when he saw Rowan slip into her desk chair that afternoon. She moved slower now, not because she was hurt, but because every step had become a careful thought. She had always been silent. Now she was carrying a different kind of silence, a protective one. By late day, Redden noticed the message light blinking on the office phone. He picked it up, listened, and felt his stomach tighten. "Specialist Hale," he said quietly, stepping toward her desk. "General Briggs wants to see you again now." Rowan nodded. No surprise, no visible fear. She stood, smoothed her uniform, and walked toward the unit doors with steady steps. Only Redden noticed the slightest pause when she reached for the handle. Fort Brenton's headquarters building felt colder as she walked the familiar path to the general's wing. The hallway outside his office was empty this time, strangely quiet. She knocked once on the wooden door and heard the sharp command to enter. General Briggs sat behind his desk, hands clasped, jaw tight. His assistants were gone. This time, whatever he wanted, he meant it to be private. He didn't offer her a seat. "You have a behavior problem, specialist," he began, his voice filled with annoyance. "Your attitude yesterday was unacceptable, and I am not convinced you understand the seriousness of military discipline." Rowan kept her eyes fixed on a neutral spot on the wall just past his shoulder, her posture perfect. She didn't speak unless spoken to. She knew the rules of the room better than most soldiers twice her rank. Briggs stood walking around her slowly, his boots clicking sharply against the polished floor. "You stand too calm for someone who was corrected," he continued. "Too composed, like you think you are above this, above me." Her breathing stayed even. Her gaze didn't shift. Inside, her pulse stayed steady, trained long ago to never show what she felt. That calmness annoyed him even more. "I am debating sending you somewhere else," he said, stopping directly behind her. "Somewhere to reset your perspective. Somewhere to remind you of your place. Maybe motor pool duty, maybe basic tasks. Somewhere you cannot pretend to be anything more than an office clerk." Her fingers tightened once against her thigh, barely noticeable, but it was enough to show the deep truth of the moment. She had reached the very edge of something inside herself. Briggs stepped in front of her again, searching her face for any sign of discomfort or resistance. "What do you have to say for yourself?" he demanded. Rowan inhaled slowly, held her breath for a silent second, and exhaled. It was the only answer she offered. Her silence was no longer submission. It was something else entirely, something that made even Briggs pause for half a heartbeat. He didn't understand it. He only felt it. It made him uneasy. She maintained perfect military poise, standing in a way no average specialist ever did. Shoulders aligned, spine straight, eyes forward. No fear, no apology, The room felt different around her, as if the air had changed without touching anything. Briggs frowned, disturbed by a feeling he couldn't name. He dismissed her with a sharp wave of his hand. "Get out of my office," he said. "And specialist, watch yourself." Rowan saluted, turned, and left the room. But something in her walk had changed. The calm she wore every day had turned into something sharper, something waiting, and for the first time since she arrived at Fort Brenton, someone finally noticed. An older sergeant major stepped aside as she passed, his eyes narrowing not at her haircut, not at the rumors, but at her stride, at the precise way her foot landed, at the level tilt of her head. It struck him like a memory from a long time ago. He had seen that walk before. He had seen it in people who were not what they seemed to be. Rowan moved down the hallway with the same quiet control she had always carried. But now the weight behind it had shifted, becoming thicker, stronger, more dangerous. The base didn't know it yet, but the coming conflict was no longer headed toward her. It was coming from her. The week after her second meeting with General Briggs seemed quiet on the surface, but the ground beneath Fort Brenton had begun to shift in ways no one could yet name. Rowan Hail returned to her duties with the same steady rhythm she always carried, but something subtle had changed in how the world moved around her. Soldiers still whispered, still stole glances at her uneven hair, but their confidence in the rumors had begun to crack without them realizing why. The first hint appeared in the motor pool. A stack of communications crates had been left near the loading dock, each one packed with cables, routers, and backup batteries, heavy enough that most soldiers used 2 hands and a grunt to get them off the ground. Rowan approached them with her usual calm, flipping through a clipboard to check serial numbers. Staff Sergeant Redden called out from across the bay to leave the heavier ones for him. Before he finished the sentence, Rowan reached down, gripped one of the crates with a single hand, and lifted it like she was picking up a toolbox instead of a 50-pound load. The 2 mechanics nearby paused. One blinked, the other looked at the crate, then at his own hand. "That didn't look light," one murmured. Rowan didn't notice their stares. She just set it on the tailgate of a truck with smooth control, adjusted her sleeve, and returned to her clipboard. There was no show, no visible effort, just pure efficiency. But the mechanics watched her a little differently as she walked away. Later that afternoon, the unit ran a scheduled signal blackout test, something meant to simulate a system failure during field operations. The hallway lights dimmed, screens flickered, radios hummed with empty stat. Soldiers scrambled into problem-solving patterns they rarely used, half frustrated, half curious. Redden sent Rowan to check one of the junction boxes near the back of the building, assuming she would relay basic information so a technician could fix it. She knelt beside the panel, opened the casing, and stared at the tangled nest of wires. It should have taken minutes just to identify the problem. Instead, Rowan reached in with both hands, moving with quick, precise motions that made no sense for someone supposedly trained only in office work. Her fingertips shifted connections rapidly, tightening one clamp, releasing another, joining 2 circuits with a small tool she took from her pocket as if she carried it everywhere. The blackout ended instantly. The overhead lights snapped back on. Radios crackled back to life. Computer screens rebooted with soft beeps that echoed down the hall. Redden jogged around the corner, his breath catching when he saw her closing the panel. "How did you?" he began, then stopped. Rowan simply stood, dusted her hands off, and gave her usual quiet report. "It's stable now, Sergeant." He stared at her for a moment, searching her face for some explanation. She offered none. She just walked past him, leaving him with questions that felt heavier than any of the rumors he'd overheard. The next clue arrived in the form of a ranger unit temporarily assigned to Fort Brenton for joint training. They were the kind of soldiers who carried their experience in their eyes, always scanning, always calculating. One of them stepped into the signal shop, while Rowan was adjusting a radio mount on her shoulder. As she reached up, her sleeve shifted slightly, showing the edge of a faded tattoo. Not a name, not a symbol, coordinates. The ranger's gaze sharpened instantly. He recognized coordinates when he saw them, and these were exact. So exact, they could only mean one thing: a location tied to something secret or dangerous, or both. Before he could get a clearer look, Rowan pulled her sleeve back down, thanked him for holding the door, and walked away without knowing she'd revealed anything at all. The ranger watched her leave, frowning. "Since when do office clerks tattoo coordinates on their arm?" he muttered under his breath. Curiosity replaced mockery. Unease set in. 2 days later, Rowan found herself standing at the shooting range, observing a training session to collect equipment logs. She kept her distance, clipboard in hand, watching shooters from behind the safety line. A private's stance was slightly off, left foot too wide, elbow locked too tight. Without thinking, Rowan lifted her hand and made a tiny adjustment signal. Just a quick downward flick, and a subtle wrist turn. The private corrected instantly. The range coach blinked. That gesture was not something clerks learned. It was a silent correction used by joint terminal attack controllers, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance specialists, and special operations instructor. He scanned the area for whoever had made it, expecting an experienced non-commissioned officer. When he spotted Rowan lowering her hand, he felt confusion creep through him like cold water. "Impossible," he whispered. She shouldn't know that. By now, rumors were no longer jokes told in the smoking area. They had turned into hushed questions exchanged in hallways, glances traded over coffee, conversations paused when Rowan walked by. Every small thing she did, every efficient movement, every quiet correction added to the growing puzzle. In the supply room, Redden finally approached her with a hesitant tone he had never used before. "Hail, can I ask you something?" She looked up from the form she was sorting. Her expression was open, calm. "Of course, Sergeant. Who trained you?" It was not an accusation. It was not even curiosity mixed with doubt. It was a genuine question, the kind asked by someone trying to understand a mystery he didn't want to misunderstand. But Rowan froze, not in fear, not in guilt, but in thought. She held his gaze just long enough to show she had heard him, then returned her eyes to the papers. "I've had good mentors," she said softly. It was an answer, but not the answer he had asked for. Redden felt something tighten in his chest. He knew she was avoiding the question, without being disrespectful. He also knew she had just confirmed the one thing she desperately wished she hadn't. She wasn't what the paperwork said she was. As Rowan walked away, the unease around her hardened into something sharper. Soldiers watched her movements the way people watch a storm forming far off in the distance, quietly, uncertainly, instinctively aware that something powerful is gathering, even if they cannot see it yet. Mockery had faded, confusion had taken over, and somewhere deep inside Fort Brenton, the first threads of truth were beginning to unravel. The joint training exercise at Fort Brenton had been planned for months. Rangers from the 75th Regiment, aviation crews from the 33rd Combat Aviation Brigade, and a group of intelligence analysts from the brigade headquarters filled the field training area with the usual noise of radios, rotors and shouted check-ins. Drones buzzed overhead, sending down steady live feeds. Humvees rolled over dusty trails. The sky was clear, the weather ideal. Everything was supposed to run smoothly. It lasted 11. Rowan Hail was standing near the rear of the command tent, with a clipboard in hand, watching traffic move across the central map screens, when the first flicker of interference shuddered across the radio nets. A faint pop of static slipped through the speakers, then a second, then a third. A junior specialist tapped the monitor. "Sir, we've got feed distortion." Before anyone could respond, the distortion turned into a full collapse. Every radio died at the same time, not one channel, all channels. Across the tent, soldiers froze as the quiet buzz of communications turned into absolute dead silence. Pilots' voices vanished mid-sentence. Drone feeds froze on single frames. Satellite overlays flickered and went dark. Even the emergency backup network, a system designed to withstand almost anything, returned nothing but a hollow hum. "Are we jammed?" someone shouted. "We can't be jammed. This is internal traffic. What did we lose?" "Everything." "That's impossible." The tent erupted into controlled panic. Officers leaned over consoles, tapping buttons that refused to respond. A ranger lieutenant slammed his headset onto a table. An aviation captain cursed under his breath, staring at the blank flight tracker, where 3 helicopters had been visible seconds earlier. Redden stood near the center, his jaw tightening as he scanned the chaos. He didn't understand what had caused it, but he could feel the weight of something serious,
settling into the air. There was no redundancy left, not one backup, not one alternate channel. The entire exercise halt. Inside that storm of confusion, Rowan Hail stood completely still. She didn't fidget. She didn't look around. She didn't panic like the others. She inhaled once, slow, controlled, then she moved, not rushed, not hesitant, but with a quiet confidence that cut through the noise like a blade. She stepped past a pair of non-commissioned officers, who barely noticed her until she gently shifted them aside. She moved to an auxiliary node panel that no one used unless they were part of higher-level tech teams, opened the casing, and began working the internal switches by hand. "Specialist, step away from that," an intelligence captain barked. Rowan didn't even glance at him. Her hands moved in sharp, precise patterns, tightening, flipping, resetting, bypass. She worked like someone who had done this in worse conditions, in places where failure meant more than a paused training exercise. Within seconds, she reached for a supplemental control panel. She pressed a sequence of buttons no regular soldier would know exist. The panel flashed once, indicating an authorization level far above her rank, but she bypassed it with a manual override that should have been impossible. Redden stared, stunned. No office clerk should have even known where that panel was, let alone how to operate it. "What is she doing?" Her sergeant whispered. A second later, Rowan grabbed a field handset that wasn't even connected to the main network, and keyed it with a calm, clipped tone, switching bandwidth routing to low-frequency fallback, rewrote drone telemetry to no, push aircraft location trackers to emergency overlay, confirm gridlock restoration. No one in the tent understood half the terms, but the tone was unmistakable. It wasn't the voice of a specialist in a signal unit. It was the voice of someone who had worked real intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance in real combat zones. Someone who had issued commands with lives hanging in the balance. Redden felt his stomach drop. He had heard that tone before, years ago when an ISR controller talked a ranger platoon through a night ambush, with drones failing overhead. It was the voice of someone who had stood in the middle of chaos, and remained the only person who could see the whole battlefield clearly. A drone feed jolted back to life on one of the screens. Someone gasped. "What? How?" Rowan didn't react. She continued issuing precise orders into the handset. Push voice comms to emergency channel 7, reset encryption seed, bring analog backups online, confirm full restore, and then one by one the systems obeyed her. Drone feed stabilized, flickering, then sharpening into live images once more. Aircraft trackers lit back up on the display. Radios crackled, then carried fragments of voices. Pilots announcing altitude, rangers confirming position, intel analysts reporting restored uplinks. Within 45 seconds, less time than it took most teams to reboot a single workstation, the entire network was back. Silence settled across the command.
Not the chaotic kind, but the stunned kind. The kind that pressed into every corner, pulsing with disbelief. Rowan lowered the handset, closed the auxiliary panel gently, and stepped back as if she had just finished organizing a stack of papers instead of restoring the entire communication grid of 3 major units. Every eye in the tent was on her. No one spoke. No one understood how she had done it. No one knew who she really was. Redden's heartbeat was loud in his ears. He didn't approach her. He didn't know what to say, but he knew with absolute certainty that he had just watched something extraordinary, something that didn't fit with any rumor, any guess, any explanation he had heard in months. Somewhere across post, a runner sprinted toward headquarters to deliver the report. A specialist restored the network. A specialist. When the message reached General Briggs's office minutes later, he set down his pen, blinked once, and repeated it under his breath. A specialist from the signal battalion did what? His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping sharply at the edge. He didn't know her name yet, but he was about to. The emergency command room pulsed with tense energy, every screen alive again after Rowan's intervention. Officers from the Rangers, aviation, intelligence, and the signal battalion clustered around the central table, their voices low and uncertain. Everyone was asking the same unspoken question: what had they just witnessed? The door opened sharply, a colonel straight, a ranger captain stepped aside. Staff Sergeant Redden instinctively moved to attention. Brigadier General Marcus Thorne stepped into the room with the quiet authority of someone used to walking into chaos and making it stop. He was older than Briggs, his uniform lined with combat service stars, his eyes carrying the weight of long years in the shadows. Thorne had once commanded a highly secret Special Operations Aviation Detachment, one most soldiers only heard rumors about. He came to the base to observe the joint exercise. He had not expected to be called for an emergency restoration briefing. "Who stabilized the network?" he asked, his tone sharp and focused. Redden opened his mouth, but someone else answered. "She did." Every head turned as Rowan Hail stepped forward from the edge of the room, standing quietly, hands behind her back, her posture balanced. Thorne glanced at her, just a passing look, the way most generals glance at junior enlisted during busy moments. Then he froze, literally froze. His breath caught, his eyebrows pulled together, and for the first time since stepping into the room, the general's voice softened, deep, stunned, and unmistakably human. "Hail," he whispered. "Rowan Hail. Is that really you?" The room fell into absolute silence. It wasn't the silence of confusion anymore. It was the silence of recognition. Rowan did not move, did not answer, did not even blink. Thorne stepped closer, slow and cautious, as if approaching someone brought back from memory. "I thought you were gone," he said quietly. "I was told you'd been moved off-world, reassigned, protected." Briggs stiffened at the word protected. Thorne looked around the room, his eyes burning through every officer who had stood there seconds before without realizing who they were looking at. "Everyone in this room needs to understand something right now," he said, his voice shifting from stunned to commanding. "This is not a random specialist from your battalion." His hand gestured toward Rowan, steady, respectful, almost disbelieving. "This is former Warrant Officer 3, Rowan Hail, one of the Army's most skilled ISR systems controllers. She was attached to a Tier 1 unit whose missions will never appear in any briefing you've seen." Murmurs rippled through the room. "She coordinated drone feeds, air support, electronic overwatch, and real-time targeting for teams operating in some of the most hostile regions on Earth. When everything fell apart on that classified mission overseas, she stayed on the net until the last possible second." Thorne's voice tightened, his jaw flexing as old memories flashed behind his eyes. "She vanished from our records after that. Her assignment was erased. She was moved under a protective protocol. Only a handful of us knew she was still alive." He looked at her again. Really looked. "And now she's here wearing specialist rank, carrying paperwork." General Briggs swallowed hard, his face whitening with every word. His breath grew shallow, a tremor forming at the corner of his jaw. He remembered the scissors, the hair falling, the punishment he delivered like she was nothing. A Tier 1 ISR controller, a warrant officer, a protected asset, and he had cut her hair as a lesson in humility. The realization hit him like a collapsing wall. Rowan Hail did not look at him. She did not smirk or seek satisfaction. She simply stood in that silence, calm, steady, humble, as the truth of who she was spread through the room like a shockwave, and for the first time in his career, Major General Alden Briggs felt small. Brigadier General Thorne took one quiet step, then another, until he stood directly in front of Rowan. The room was so still that the hum of the overhead projectors sounded like distant thunder. Officers watched with a mixture of awe and disbelief, trying to connect the plain-faced specialist before them with the legend Thorne had just revealed. Then Thorne did something no one in that room expected. He brought his hand up in a slow, deliberate salute, not the crisp, automatic salute of regulation, not the kind exchanged out of formality or ceremony. This was different. This salute carried weight, earned respect, memory, and something deeper. It rose upward like a quiet acknowledgement of everything she had survived, everything she had done, everything she had lost. Rowan did not return the salute at first. She blinked once, a small flicker of emotion behind her calm expression. Then she raised her hand in return, steady and controlled, meeting him in the silent space between them. Around the room, chairs scraped softly as the Rangers stood to their feet. Aviation officers removed their caps. Intelligence soldiers straightened their posture. No one spoke.
No one dared. It was as if the air itself had frozen around Specialist Rowan Hail, the woman who had walked unnoticed through their hallways for months. Redden felt something press into his chest, heavy and unexpected. His eyes burned, not from shock or even pride, but from the realization that she had carried this entire truth alone. All those mornings she brought him completed packets, all those quiet nods, all those moments she absorbed insults without a single word. He had seen her competence, her calm, her strange little habits that never quite lined up with the story on paper, but he had never imagined this. The weight of his misunderstanding hit him harder than any reprimand ever could. On the far side of the room, General Briggs his mouth opened slightly as if he meant to say something, anything to reclaim authority or dignity, but no words came. His throat tightened, his breath shook. Every syllable he tried to form collapsed under the realization of what he had done. The scissors, the hair, the punishment, the arrogance, the humiliation. He had treated a warrant officer, no, not just a warrant officer, but her as if she were unimportant, and now every person in that room could see the truth reflected across his face. Rowan finally lowered her salute. Thorne lowered his with a slow exhale, as though a weight had just lifted from him after years of carrying it silently. Redden wiped the corner of his eye quickly, hoping no one saw. A ranger near the back whispered, "I can't believe it." All this time an intelligence captain shook his head softly. "We joked. We mocked. God help us, we mocked her." The shame spread through the room like a cold draft. Then Thorne nodded to Rowan to speak. She stepped forward just enough to be heard clearly. Her voice was soft, steady, without tremor or anger. No pride, no bitterness, only truth. "Sir," she said, addressing Thorne, but speaking to everyone listening, "I was following orders, nothing more." The simplicity of it struck the room harder than the reveal itself. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain her absence. She didn't carry the pain openly or seek revenge. She didn't mention the mission that went wrong or the lives she tried to save or the years she'd spent in protective silence. She simply offered the one line that defined all real service, and in that moment, the humility hit everyone like a shockwave. Thorne's jaw tightened, emotion flickering in his eyes again. Redden's head dropped slightly, overwhelmed by respect. The ranger stared at her like she was carved from something unbreakable. Even the intelligence officers who prided themselves on knowing everything were left speechless, humbled by how little they had seen. Briggs seemed to shrink in place, shoulders curling inward as if trying to disappear into his uniform. The truth had destroyed him more completely than any reprimand could. The room stayed silent for a long, breathless moment. No one dared to move. No one dared to look away. Specialist Rowan Hail, the woman they dismissed, ignored, mocked, and pushed aside, stood at the center of it all, quiet and composed, carrying herself with the dignity of someone who had never needed validation to begin with. And for the first time since arriving at Fort Brenton, the entire base finally saw her. The days that followed moved slower, quieter, as if Fort Brenton itself were adjusting to a truth it hadn't been ready to face. Rowan Hail reported for duty at her usual time, carrying her clipboard and tablet with the same steady rhythm she always had. There was no ceremony, no announcement, no sudden change to her uniform. She didn't pin on old rank. She didn't ask for reassignment or special treatment. High Command offered more than once to restore her status as Warrant Officer 3. To bring her back into the fold she'd once belonged to. She thanked them with calm eyes and a respectful nod, but she declined. "I'm where I need to be," she said softly. Nothing more. She didn't want applause. She didn't want her past dragged back into the light. She didn't want soldiers whispering about secret missions she could never explain. Rowan Hail chose service, not the spotlight. And so she returned to her desk, filed her reports, checked her logs, and helped the unit prepare for the next training cycle. But the base did not return to normal, not around her. Soldiers who had once laughed behind her back now straightened when she walked by. Rangers who once dismissed her with a smirk now nodded with sharp respect, some even stepping aside to give her space in cramped hallways. Aviation officers paused mid-sentence to acknowledge her presence. Younger soldiers, privates, and specialists who had heard only the rumors looked at her with something close to awe. their eyes wide with a respect they didn't know how to express. Even the most stubborn skeptics treated her with caution, not out of fear but because they now understood something they had missed for months. She carried weight that did not show on her sleeve. Staff Sergeant Redden watched her more carefully than ever. Not with suspicion, but with a protective admiration he didn't bother to hide. When he handed her a stack of paperwork, or asked her to double-check her routing, his voice carried a gentleness he didn't offer many people. And when she nodded, each time he felt a quiet pride in working alongside someone who had done so much with so little recognition. General Briggs did not return to the command building. Word spread quickly that he had been placed under investigation for abusing his power and improper behavior. The scissors, the humiliation, the accusations, every detail had been recorded, witnessed, and reported. His career, built on strict rules and rigid control, collapsed under the weight of his own actions. Some said he resigned quietly, others said he was removed. But Rowan never asked, and she never cared to know. She kept walking the same halls, moving with the same measured steps, carrying herself with the same quiet balance that had always been there. Only now people finally saw. Rowan crossed the parade field at dusk. Her short, uneven hair brushed gently by the evening wind. The sun dipped low behind the hangars, casting long shadows across the grass, and for the first time since arriving at Fort Brenton, she felt a quiet sense of peace settle over her. No whispers followed her now, no judgments lingered in the air, only the soft rhythm of her footsteps and the calm she carried inside, earned through years of unseen battles and unspoken sacrifice.